At my son's wedding reception, he stood up and said into the microphone, "I want to thank everyone who made this day possible, especially my wonderful in-laws, Frank and Carol, who spared no expense." He looked right past me. I was sitting at table 11, near the kitchen. I smiled anyway. What he didn't know was that I had written the check for the entire wedding, every single dollar of it. Good day. Dear listeners, this is Hannah. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Please like this video and stay with me until the very end, and let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. I used to think that the greatest thing I could give my children was unconditional love. For 69 years, I believed that. My late husband, George, and I built our life on that principle. He was a contractor. I was a school librarian for 31 years. And together, we saved carefully, lived modestly, and raised 2 children in our 4-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio. When George passed 4 years ago from a heart attack that came without warning, I thought my son would step closer. He was my only son, my firstborn. I thought grief would pull us together. I was wrong about that. But I didn't know how wrong until the wedding. The requests started about 8 months after George's funeral. At first, they seemed reasonable. My son called asking if I could help cover the deposit on a new apartment for him and his girlfriend, Melissa. Just a bridge loan. Mom, my lease is up and we need to move fast. I transferred $2,000 without hesitation. He was my boy. Of course I helped. Then Melissa became his fiancée. And the requests changed shape. The engagement party needed a venue deposit, $1,200. Then the rehearsal dinner. Then the wedding photographer, who apparently only held dates with a 30% down payment. Could you help us lock him in? Mom, he's the best in Columbus. We'll pay you back before the wedding. I promise. I paid the photographer, and the florist, and the caterer's deposit. Each time, my son promised repayment. Each time, I told myself he was young and still finding his footing. When the venue itself came up, a renovated barn outside Dublin, Ohio, that Melissa had fallen in love with my son, called on a Sunday afternoon. Mom, I hate to even ask this, but the venue wants full payment 6 months out, and we're just short. Really short. Could you possibly cover it? Just until my quarterly bonus comes through, the venue cost $14,000. I transferred it. By the time the wedding weekend arrived, I had contributed $61,400 over 18 months. I had it documented because I am, at heart, a librarian. I keep records of everything. I had a spreadsheet. Every transfer, every date, every promise of repayment. Not a single dollar had come back. I told myself none of that mattered. I was going to watch my son get married. I had a new dress, pale blue, that I'd bought at Macy's on sale. I had a card with a heartfelt note inside. I had a small gift, a framed photo of my son as a little boy, building a birdhouse with his father in the backyard. I thought he'd love it. I drove myself to the venue on the Friday evening of the rehearsal dinner. I hadn't been asked to help plan the seating or the program or anything. Really, I'd only been asked for money, but I told myself that was fine. That young people plan their own weddings now. That I shouldn't expect to be involved. My son met me in the parking lot. He looked handsome in his rehearsal clothes. But when he saw me, his smile did something I didn't quite understand. It tightened, like a door closing slowly. Mom. Hey. Listen. Before we go in, Melissa's family is kind of taking over the rehearsal dinner. and her mom has everything organized in a very specific way. Maybe just kind of hang back tonight, don't try to sit at the head table. There's a seat saved for you somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the middle. I stood in that parking lot in my pale blue dress, and I heard my late husband's voice in my head saying, "Dottie, just let it go." So I let it go. The rehearsal dinner was beautiful. Melissa's mother, Carol, had decorated the private room with soft candlelight and fresh eucalyptus. She was warm and gracious to everyone around her. When she passed me, she gave me a polite smile and moved on. I sat at a table with two of my son's college friends who talked to each other the whole evening. My son gave a toast thanking his in-laws for their constant support and generosity. He thanked his groomsmen. He thanked the venue staff. He did not mention me. I drove home that night and I sat in the kitchen where George and I used to have our coffee every morning. I thought about the $14,000 I'd wired for that barn. I thought about the photographer who at that very moment was reviewing his equipment for tomorrow's ceremony. I thought about the flowers that would open in the morning. Then I opened my laptop and I looked at my bank account. I pulled up the spreadsheet I'd been keeping. $61,400. And then, because I am a librarian, because I research, because I believe in knowing what is true, I looked up my son and Melissa on social media. His Instagram, her Instagram, their combined registry page, which I had never been sent, but found easily enough. What I saw made my hands go very still on the keyboard. 3 weeks before the wedding, while I had been transferring money for catering deposits, my son had posted a photo of himself and Melissa on a long weekend trip to Napa Valley. Vineyard tour, wine tasting, a boutique hotel with exposed brick walls and a fireplace in the room. 37 people had commented, "Beautiful couple, you two deserve this." 2 weeks before that, Melissa had posted about their new living room furniture. Finally, upgraded our space with a caption that linked to a furniture brand I recognized as expensive. The sectional sofa alone, I looked it up, was $4,000. I sat very still in George's kitchen for a long time. The next morning, I put on my pale blue dress and I drove to the wedding. The ceremony was genuinely beautiful. My son cried when Melissa walked down the aisle, and I loved him for that. Because George used to say a man who isn't afraid to cry in public has a strong heart. I held a tissue, and I thought about the little boy with the birdhouse, and I let myself feel proud. Just for those few minutes. Then the reception began, and I found my place card. Table 11. I walked the room once looking for it, thinking perhaps there was a table 11 near the front. There wasn't. Table 11 was beside the door that led to the catering kitchen. I could hear the clatter of dishes behind the wall. The other guests at my table were an elderly great-uncle of Melissa's, who was hard of hearing, a college acquaintance of my son's I'd never met, and two co-workers of Melissa's, who spent the evening turned toward each other. My son's table, table 1, naturally was at the center of the room beneath the chandelier I had helped pay for. He and Melissa sat surrounded by both sets of parents, which is to say, Melissa's parents, and my son's father's chair was empty because George was 4 years in the ground and my son had not thought to place a photograph there, or a flower, or any acknowledgement that his father had existed when my son stood for the speech. He thanked his in-laws by name. He thanked his groomsmen with individual jokes that made the room laugh. He thanked Melissa's grandmother for traveling from Arizona. He said, "And thank you to everyone who helped make this day what it is." A sweep of the room. A smile. That was me. Everyone. I excused myself to the restroom. I stood at the sink and looked at my reflection for a moment. 69 years old. George's wife, for 41 of them. This boy's mother for 34. I opened my purse, and I took out my phone, and I called my friend Ruth. Ruth and I have been friends since 1987. We met at the school district, where we both worked. She, as a third-grade teacher, and I in the library. She is the sharpest person I know. She also spent 12 years as a paralegal before she retired. Which matters for what comes next. She picked up on the second ring. I'm at the wedding. I said, I know. She said, how is it? I told her about Table 11. About the speech. About the Napa trip I'd found online. I kept my voice very low and very even. The way you learn to speak in libraries. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Dorothy, what have you given them total? $61,400. Give or take. She was quiet again. A longer quiet. How much has been repaid? I didn't answer. She said, when you get home tonight, don't do anything. Just sleep. Come to my house tomorrow morning and bring your spreadsheet. I went back to the reception. I danced once. With the hard of hearing great uncle, who turned out to be a wonderful dancer. I ate the salmon, which was very good. I watched my son laugh and spin Melissa on the dance floor, and I tried to separate the love I felt for him from everything else. I wasn't entirely successful, but I tried. When I said goodbye, my son hugged me and said, thanks for coming. Mom, it really meant a lot. I said, it was a beautiful wedding. Neither of us said anything else. I drove home. I sat in the kitchen. I did not sleep well. The next morning, I drove to Ruth's house with my laptop and my printed spreadsheet and a box of the granola bars she likes. She made coffee. We sat at her kitchen table the way we had sat together through 37 years of hard conversations. And I spread the documents out between us. She read everything carefully. She is a reader. Ruth. She doesn't skim. After 20 minutes, she looked up. Dorothy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. I nodded. Were any of these transfers requested with real urgency? Did he ever tell you something bad would happen if you didn't send money? I thought about it. Not in a threatening way. But he always had a deadline. The vendor needs it by Friday. The photographer won't hold the date. If we don't pay the deposit by Monday, we lose the venue. There was always a clock. Ruth nodded slowly. That's called manufactured urgency. It's a pressure tactic. She paused. Has he ever asked how you're doing financially? I mean, asked about your retirement accounts. Your savings. Once. I said, about a year ago. I thought he was just being responsible. Ruth's expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes did. Okay, she said. Here's what we're going to do. What Ruth knew, from her years as a paralegal, was that I needed to protect myself before I made any move that my son could see coming. The moment he realized I was pulling back, she said, the reaction would tell me everything I needed to know about his intentions. She helped me draft an email to an estate planning attorney she knew personally. A woman named Patricia Holland, who had an office in Worthington. We sent it that Sunday afternoon. On Monday morning, Patricia's office called and scheduled me for Wednesday. On Tuesday, my son called. He sounded warm. The way he always did, right after asking for something. Just checking in. Mom, how are you feeling after the weekend? It was such a perfect day. We're so grateful you could be there. I said I was glad I could be there. He paused for just a beat. Then said, actually, there's something I wanted to run by you. Melissa and I have been looking at houses. There's one in Bexley that's just incredible. 4 bedrooms. Great school district for when we have kids. The thing is, We're about 40,000 short on the down payment. We were going to ask the bank, but interest rates are brutal right now. I was thinking maybe, just as a short-term thing, $40,000. I let the silence sit for a moment. I said, "Let me think about it. I'll get back to you this week." He sounded slightly surprised. I had never said "let me think about it" before, but he recovered quickly. "Of course. Take your time. No rush." There was rush. I knew. There was always rush. I went to Patricia Holland's office on Wednesday with my spreadsheet, my bank records, and 3 years of text messages that I had the foresight to screenshot and print. It was 41 pages. Patricia Holland was in her mid-50s, calm and precise, with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She reviewed my documents the way Ruth had carefully, completely. When she finished, she set her glasses on the desk and looked at me. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "your instincts are correct, and your timing is good. You still have significant assets to protect. Here's what I recommend." She walked me through a revocable living trust. All my assets, the house, the investment accounts, George's life insurance that I had carefully preserved. My retirement funds would transfer into the trust. I would remain the trustee, fully in control, but the assets would be shielded. She also recommended a new will. My current will, I admitted, named my son as primary beneficiary of everything. Patricia suggested restructuring it a modest inheritance for my son. Contingent condition. Educational trusts for any future grandchildren. Maturing at 25. The remainder to the Columbus Public Library Foundation, an organization George and I had donated to for years. It felt right. When she asked if I was prepared for my son's reaction, I thought about the microphone at table 11. I said yes. The paperwork was filed the following week. I also quietly closed the joint account my son had asked me to open 2 years ago so I could help him manage things. He had occasionally moved money between it and his personal account. I had never questioned it. I questioned it now. Looking back, 4 days after filing, my son called. His voice was different. Flat. Careful. "Mom?" I tried to access the shared account to transfer some money we talked about. "It's showing as closed," I said. "Yes. I closed it." "You closed it." He paused. "Why, I've been reassessing my finances." I said, "Reassessing." He repeated the word like it was in a foreign language. "Mom, what does that mean? Did someone tell you to do this?" I told him I had spoken with a financial advisor. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, gently, carefully, "Is everything okay with you? You haven't seemed quite like yourself lately. Since the wedding, I've been a little worried about you. You seem," he searched for the word confused, "about things." There it was. "I'm not confused," I said. "I understand my finances clearly." "Of course you do," he said, recovering quickly. "Of course. I just want to make sure you have support. This is a lot to manage alone." He paused again. "Have you thought about the house? About whether it makes sense for you to keep living there by yourself? At your age?" I said I was quite happy in my house. He said, "Why don't Melissa and I come over Saturday? We can have lunch and just talk. Make sure everything is okay." I said, "That sounds fine." Then I called Ruth. She came over Friday night, and we sat in the kitchen and prepared. She knew the playbook. She had seen it in family court cases during her paralegal years, and she walked me through what to expect. First, he'll present concern. Then he'll escalate to alarm. If that doesn't work, he'll bring in a third party who appears neutral. Don't let them in your house with anyone you haven't vetted. Saturday arrived. My son came alone. No Melissa. Which I hadn't expected. He sat in George's chair at the kitchen table without thinking about it, and I watched him do it, and I felt something in me go quiet. He had brought coffee cake from a bakery, which was the kind of gesture he made when he wanted something. He said, "Mom, I want to be honest with you. I'm worried. The account closures. The financial advisor you won't tell me about. And the way you said no about the house, this isn't like you. You've always been so generous. Something has shifted. And I think you may be going through something emotionally since Dad died." I said, "I'm grieving." "That's appropriate," he said. "Of course. But this pulling back from family," I said. "How much have I given you in the last 18 months? He blinked. "What do you mean?" "Given, transferred. Contributed. Paid for." He shifted in George's chair. "Mom? That's family. You wanted to help. How much?" I said. He said he didn't know off the top of his head. I opened my laptop. I turned it around so he could see the spreadsheet. I said, $61,400. I have every transaction dated and labeled. The photographer. The florist. The venue. The catering deposit. The rehearsal dinner room. The bridesmaid gifts when you said Melissa's family couldn't cover them. He stood up. "That's not fair. You offered. You wanted to be involved," I said. "I offered because you called every time with a deadline and a reason it couldn't wait." I said, "How much of it has come back to me?" He didn't answer. I said, "You asked me for $40,000 the Tuesday after the wedding." While I was sitting at table 11, his face changed. "That's what this is about." "The seating," I said. "The seating is a small part of it. The larger part is that I paid for the wedding and wasn't thanked in the reception speech. The larger part is $61,000 with zero repayment. The larger part is that you have asked me for money 41 times in 18 months, and you have not once asked me how I am doing. Not once asked about my health, my finances, whether the house needs repairs, whether I'm lonely." He said, "That's not true." I opened the text messages. 41 pages. Printed. I set them on the table. He looked at them and said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, almost to himself, "You've been documenting this." I said, "I'm a librarian. I document everything." He left shortly after. Not angry, not yet, but rattled. Ruth called me that evening and I told her everything. She said, "Next will come the charm offensive. Then the pressure. Be ready." The charm offensive arrived the following Tuesday. Melissa called. She had a sweet voice. "Melissa." And she used it carefully. She said, "Dorothy, I just want you to know that we love you, and we're worried about this distance growing between everyone. My own family has been so important to us, and I'd hate to think," she paused delicately, "that there's some misunderstanding about the wedding. If you felt overlooked, I'm so sorry. I promise that wasn't our intention." I said, "I appreciate that." "Melissa," she said, "maybe the four of us could have dinner. Start fresh." I said I would think about it. I called Patricia Holland the next morning. She was not surprised. She said, "Mrs. Calloway, I have to inform you that your son's name appeared on a records inquiry about your financial accounts yesterday. He's been gathering information." I said, "What does that mean for us?" She said, "It means move faster. We need to finalize the trust documents this week." and I need you to have a complete evaluation from your physician on record. Not because anything is wrong with you, but because if this goes anywhere near a courtroom, we want documentation of your full competency. I called my doctor, a woman I had seen for 18 years, who had known George, and who once stayed on the phone with me for 40 minutes the night he died. She saw me the following morning. She documented my health history, my cognitive function, my decision-making capacity. She wrote a formal letter. She was, frankly, annoyed on my behalf. The following Thursday, my son arrived at my front door with Melissa and a man I didn't know. The man was in his 40s, dressed in a blazer, with a practiced expression of professional concern. My son said, "Mom, this is Dr. Dia Ferris. He's a counselor who works with families going through estate transitions. We thought maybe the three of us could just sit," and I said, "Is Dr. Ferris licensed in Ohio?" There was a pause. I said, "Because I'd like to call my attorney before I invite a counselor I've never heard of into my home." Melissa said, "Dorothy, we're not trying to," I said. "I'll have my attorney call your attorney, if you've retained one." The silence that followed told me they had. I closed the door. My hands were shaking, but my voice had been steady, and I was proud of that. I called Ruth. And then I called Patricia. And then I sat down at the kitchen table and allowed myself, for about 15 minutes, to cry. Not from fear, from sorrow, because I loved my son. I had always loved my son. And somewhere along the way, without my fully noticing, he had begun to see me as a resource rather than a person. And I didn't know exactly when it had happened, or whether I had contributed to it by never once saying no. And that question was the thing that hurt most of all. After 15 minutes, I stopped. I washed my face. I called Ruth back. She came over that evening with Thai food and a yellow legal pad. We sat at the kitchen table, and she helped me think through every scenario. If he filed a competency petition, Patricia had counter-documentation. If he tried to claim the transfers were loans he'd been coerced into, there were 41 pages of texts that told a different story, every one of them initiating from his number, every one of them containing a deadline and a promise to repay. If he tried to involve Melissa's family, they had no standing. Ruth said, "Dorothy, you are going to be fine." And then she said something that I wrote down because I knew I would need to read it again later. She said, "When someone has been taking advantage of you, them reacting badly when you stop is not evidence that you did something wrong. It's evidence that you finally did something right." The petition came 10 days later. My son and Melissa, through their attorney, filed for a mental competency evaluation and temporary oversight of my financial decisions, citing erratic behavior, sudden distrust of family, and withdrawal from close relationships. Patricia was calm when she called to tell me. She said, "This is a good development." I said, "It doesn't feel like one." She said, "I know, but they've just made everything public record, which means we can now formally respond. And our response is very strong." The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Patricia sent a counterfiling with my physician's evaluation, my complete financial records, showing the pattern of transfers. In a professional cognitive assessment, she arranged with a neuropsychologist at Ohio State, who tested me for 4 hours, and then told me, somewhat dryly, that I was sharper than most of his graduate students. And a sworn statement from Ruth, detailing the conversations she had witnessed. We also subpoenaed 3 years of my son and Melissa's financial records. That was the moment. Patricia told me later. when their attorney privately recommended they withdraw the petition. They didn't. Not yet pride or stubbornness or the sunk cost of having already started, but the subpoena changed the tone of everything. Because my son, who earned a good salary in sales management, and Melissa, who did not work, had been living at a level that their income did not support. The Napa trip, the sofa, the Bexley house search, the country club membership they'd joined the previous spring. $41,000 of their lifestyle in the past 18 months had come from a 69-year-old retired librarian in Columbus. In the courtroom, my son's attorney presented his case with great sorrow. A recently widowed mother, isolated and emotionally fragile. Being manipulated by outside influences here, he looked at Ruth, who looked back at him without expression into making irrational financial decisions against her own family's interests. He called my son to testify. My son was composed and sad-seeming and spoke about his concern for me with a genuineness that, I will admit, made my chest hurt, because I believe some part of him believed it. I believe some part of him had convinced himself that this really was about my well-being. Patricia's cross-examination was thorough and quiet and devastating. She asked my son to confirm, line by line, the $61,000 in transfers. He confirmed them. She asked him to confirm that not a single dollar had been repaid. He confirmed that, adding that they had always intended to, that it was understood as family support. She asked him to confirm that the wedding reception, which he had fully paid for with his mother's money, did not include his mother in the formal toast. He said that was an oversight. She asked him to confirm that 4 days after the wedding he had called asking for $40,000 more. He said the timing was unfortunate. She asked him at your wedding reception, was your mother seated at table 11, adjacent to the kitchen? He said he hadn't been aware of the specific table. She asked who arranged the seating chart. He said Melissa had. She asked, did you review it? A very long pause. He said yes. Patricia said, no further questions. The judge, a woman named Honorable Catherine Briggs, did not take long. She denied the petition. She stated clearly, and for the record, that the evidence presented showed no indication whatsoever of cognitive decline and every indication of a woman protecting herself from a documented pattern of financial exploitation. She noted that the reverse of the petition's claims appeared to be true, rather than outside parties manipulating me. I had sought appropriate professional and personal support when faced with escalating financial pressure from family members. She also, and I was not prepared for this, referred the matter to the county's Adult Protective Services Unit for review of potential financial exploitation. Outside the courthouse, Ruth put her arm through mine, and we walked to the car without speaking. It was a cold November morning in Columbus, and the trees on the courthouse lawn were bare. I thought about the spreadsheet. $61,400. And I thought I paid for the flowers at his wedding. They were beautiful. That was enough to have done. That was a thing I had chosen freely. With love. The rest of it I had given out of something closer to fear. Fear of being shut out. Fear of being difficult. Fear of losing the last piece of George that I still had. The fallout came in waves over the following months. The Adult Protective Services inquiry did not result in charges, but it resulted in interviews and documentation that my son found deeply humiliating. His employer, a regional sales firm, conducted its own internal review after learning he was under investigation. He was not terminated, but he was passed over for a promotion he had been expecting. Melissa stopped posting on social media entirely. They sold the Bexley house dream before it began and stayed in their apartment. The country club membership was quietly allowed to lapse. In March, Ruth told me through a mutual acquaintance that Melissa and my son were in couples counseling. I found I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected. I felt tired and a little sad and strangely free. My days became my own, in a way they hadn't been in years. I went back to volunteering at the Columbus Metropolitan Library on Tuesday afternoons, which I had stopped doing because my son's requests had a way of arriving on Tuesdays and requiring immediate attention. I joined a memoir writing group at the community center. The women there ranged from 60 to 82, and every one of them had a story. We met on Thursday evenings and drank decaf and read each other our pages, and laughed and sometimes didn't laugh. In April, I drove to Savannah, Georgia, by myself. George and I had always talked about seeing it. I stayed 4 days in a small bed and breakfast on Jones Street. And I walked everywhere, and ate shrimp and grits every single morning, and took photographs of the squares in the long afternoon light. I posted one on Facebook with the caption, "Better late than never." My son commented, "Looks amazing. Mom, glad you're getting out." I did not reply. In June, I received a letter, my son's handwriting on plain white stationery. No law firm letterhead. No attorney's name anywhere. He had written it himself. "Mom, I've been trying to write this for 3 months. Every version sounds either like an excuse or like I'm performing contrition to get something, and I can't figure out how to make it not sound like that. So I'll just say what's true. I used you. I'm not sure I knew I was doing it." Which is its own kind of problem, that I could take $60,000 from my mother and tell myself it was normal family support. Melissa and I have been in counseling, and I've been doing a lot of thinking, and the conclusion I keep arriving at is that I stopped seeing you as a person at some point. You became the person who handled things, who transferred money, who could be relied upon to say yes. What I remember now is, you made the best grilled cheese I've ever tasted. You read to me every night until I was old enough to be embarrassed by it. And then you left the books on my nightstand so I could pretend I'd read them myself. You drove 4 hours each way to see me play in one college baseball game, and I didn't even start. You were always more than money. I just forgot that. I don't know if this helps anything. I'm not asking you to call. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. Love. Your son. I read it 4 times. Then I called Ruth. She asked what I was going to do. I said I didn't know yet. She said, "That's a reasonable answer." I put the letter in the drawer of the nightstand on George's side of the bed, next to a photograph and his reading glasses, which I had never been able to throw away. Maybe someday I would answer it. Maybe someday the distance would close enough that we could find each other again on different terms. Honest terms. Terms where I was his mother and not his account. Not yet. Though, first I had to finish healing. First I had to make sure I knew the difference between forgiveness and reopening a door before the foundation was rebuilt. That autumn, the maple in the front yard turned the color of a good fire, and I raked the leaves myself the way George always had. And I stood in the yard afterward with a cup of coffee and let the cold air in. I was 69 years old, in good health, with a protected estate, a solid friendship, a memoir group, a trip to Savannah behind me and Florence, Italy ahead of me in the spring. I had given my son the wedding he wanted. I had given him, over a lifetime, everything I had. I had not given him everything I had left. That distinction, I was still learning, was not selfish. It was the whole point. So I want to ask you something before I go. Have you ever felt like the person in your family who everyone turns to when something is needed, but no one turns toward when you need something in return? Have you ever written the check and sat at table 11? If so, I hope this story finds you in the right moment. I hope you know that protecting yourself is not the same as abandoning love. Setting a limit is not cruelty. And no is a complete sentence. Thank you for listening. I'm Hannah, and I'll be here next time.